Welcome to Beers with Contractors. We're cracking a cold one and taking a deep dive into the foundations of your business, pun intended, to unearth the strategies, techniques, and insider knowledge that can take your contracting business to the next level. So, grab your favorite beer, pull up a seat, and let's have a chat about the nuts and bolts of the construction industry.
Dylan, it is another week. How we doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. We're recording this one on a Friday and excited for the weekend. Had a good week. It's been kind of a little overcast, and I kind of like the rainy weather. But how are you doing?
Good. Back in town, feeling like I actually live at home, and got a home and garden show this weekend. And I used to avoid those things because I had to work in them for so long for my own business. But then now that we have a team that does that, I kind of like to wander around and say hello to some friends and figure out what I need help with on projects at home. So that's what I plan on doing, get my steps in and eating a little bit of the healthy home show food. But that's it.
Is just everything fried there?
Pretty much.
Candy bars or fried food?
Yeah. Not exactly healthy, what's it called? Organic palette of food there. So, but yeah, I realized this today. You were like, hey, we need to talk about this topic. And then I was like, oh, that'll go great with this topic. And then we were actually talking about the same damn thing.
Yep. Yeah, it was like we were on the same ESP or whatever they call it. So we were both thinking of the same topic. And well, Will, do you want to kind of cue it up?
Yeah, so when people were asking me about questions about how to retain employees, specifically in the first 90 to 120 days, we always reference this emotional cycle of change, which is a mental cycle that an employee goes through. A lot of folks would recognize it as the honeymoon period. And then, and some would even say after that is you actually have to do your job period. But there's more technical terms to that. But so much so that what we're about to go over today, and Dylan, you're much better at articulating that than I am, is we describe this to the new employee typically on day 1 or 2 of their job, and then we have to go over it again and again and again. So to our 3 listeners out there, if you imagine kind of a line graph that goes down into a valley and back up, that's what we're visually referencing, and maybe we'll put a link in the show notes. Drake, keep us honest, make sure we get this link to you. So why don't you describe the emotional cycle of change, Dylan?
Yeah, the emotional cycle of change. So this is cool. Intuitively, I think a lot of people understand this, but it's nice to have words to things that seem like basic concepts. So here's the concept. You have a new hire. They come in, and you start with the graph high. So imagine you're up high on the graph, and that's what we would call the uninformed optimism, right? Everyone's excited when they show up on their first day. They think they're going to be the most favored employee, the employee of the month. They're going to change the course of the history of that company. So they have this uninformed optimism about what's possible. And over a couple of weeks, that starts to dole out. And that honeymoon, as you mentioned, starts to fade a little bit. And then you start to go, and you imagine this graph starting to go down, down, down. And then you hit this pit of despair, or this valley of despair. And at some point in the first couple of months, you realize that what you thought was possible isn't so easy to accomplish, right? And you're like, man, I don't know. Do I actually want this job? Like, is this... Like maybe you're not in training anymore and you actually have the responsibility, so you don't get like the free coast of 2 months of like, hey, they don't have to expect anything of me yet. And so then you might start in that despair. You imagine someone who's new in sales and they've had their first 5 or 10 leads and they haven't gone as swimmingly as they thought that they could sell. So they hit that valley of despair, and a lot of people will have different responses. So you could imagine some will like buckle in and they're gonna thrive. They're gonna bounce back. Some just want to call it quits. Others are going to, seek help to be able to come out of that. And then ultimately, this progression for those that are successful in their role, it's going to go dip down, and then it's going to come back up. And as you come back up, now you're coming into informed optimism, right? So you were uninformed, then you hit this valley of despair, and now you're informed because you actually understand the job, you actually understand the company, and with that understanding, you still have hope, right? You're like, I can be fulfilled here, I can be successful here. And I can do a good job at this. So this is like a normal progression. And I think it's super helpful for managers and owners to just see this for every employee, because no one maybe the pit of despair is a lot smaller. It's shallower for some than others, but every employee experiences this, and managers need to know it so that they can coach to it.
Yeah. Oh, I've been at it 19 years, and I've hit this pit of despair. They are always such dreadful names. And with our guest today, we're probably going to talk about a book called by Greg Crabtree. And it's funny. They always have these daunting names for things like pit of despair, the black hole, no man's land. Anyway, so I've gone through it, and we even talk about this with our managers, that you will go through this. It could be 2 years down the road again, but it is super helpful to talk about this because with the younger generation that we've been bringing into the workforce, we find that coaching mindset and what we call stinking thinking, if you're a Zig Ziglar fan, or head trash, is really, really important. Some people hit that pit very quick. For example, on our production teams, it's like, oh yeah, I can install this. And then, by the way, 2 days in, it's 105 degrees outside, and you actually haven't exercised in over a month. And boy, it's like, wow, this is hard work. So we actually coach like, hey, your body is going to take some acclimating to get used to this work. So you need to be prepared for it because you're going to hit this mental block called pit of despair. And that right there, because I know tons of contractors that deal with this on a daily basis where they hired somebody, they worked for 3 days, and then they no-called, no-showed. And most of the time it's because of things like this. It's not always the case, but in many cases it is. In sales, we find some overconfidence as they finally get some wins on the board, and then they get complacent and they think like, oh, sales is easy, right? They just come to the door and it's just taking orders. No. What happens is then they start to fail into this pit of despair, and we educate them on it to say, hey, by the way, that's not the lead quality. It's nothing else other than your interpretation of the leads and the process, and you're becoming complacent. So let's keep you out of that pit of despair and get you back into the last part, which is what it's informed optimism, right?
Correct, yeah.
So, and by the way, who created this? I can't remember. We've used this for years.
I don't know. We're a Google search away. So anyone that is listening to this podcast could probably just search emotional cycle of change and find the author.
What you're saying is we created this process.
Basically, we take credit unless a lawsuit is looming, then we deny all credit.
Yeah, in that case, no, we didn't. By the way, here in a few episodes, we will have an attorney on, so maybe we don't need that attorney. Actually, we'll get our free consult, and that's how we get the attorney as a guest.
Yeah, we have a hypothetical situation we want to work out with you. And
oh, yeah, that's right. And you can be on our show, and let's just talk through it. Asking for a friend, right? Wink, wink. That's great. Well, anyway, I am excited today because we touched it with our guests over all sorts of different parts of just the trades businesses. But this individual I've known, you've heard me talk about him for years, never met him up until today, right, Dylan?
Correct, yeah. Super excited.
Yeah, so our guest today, his name is Martin Holland. Give me a second because this is a long resume. Okay, so Martin has owned numerous businesses, and what I like about Martin is he's humble because he will even tell you about the ones that failed. But then he also jumped into business coaching. He owns a practice called Anil Business Coaching and coaches people all over the country. Hopefully we hear some interesting stories on some coaching that he did over COVID, which was pretty cool. But just so you're aware, he was actually voted the #1 business coach in our region through multiple websites. He also has his own podcast called Cashflow Contractor, and I just found out top 5%. Martin may correct me on that, but also many of you have heard me talk about this book, The Profit Problem. Martin is the author of this awesome book driven towards accounting practices and things like that. And I love it because the title of the book was supposed to be called, They Say I Make Money, So Why Don't I Have Any? But I think they moved that down to a tagline. And I thought he wrote the book for me. And then I found out, no, he was actually writing it for the public. But anyway.
Apparently a lot of people can relate.
But listen, Martin, I am so happy to have you on because you are like the messiah of business coaches. You've helped so many people, and people don't realize just how many companies you have helped through their own pit of despairs. Good segue there. But Martin, welcome to Beers with Contractors. We're partaking. I don't know if you are, but
I am Starbucks coffee. So I don't know if that counts, but that's me, right?
Yeah.
No, thank you. Thank you, Will. Those are kind words. And by the way, the number, I quit at 385, probably 4 years ago. And I routinely say over 500 now since I started. And that's working with them directly. That's not having 1,000 people come to a seminar kind of deal. In every business possible, everything possible.
Yeah, that's with Anil Business Coaching, not to mention probably all the unpaid consulting you did in the past with all of your other businesses. But so let's start with Anil Business Coaching. Tell our 3 listeners about Anil, when it started, what your core focus is, and, we'll segue from there.
Interesting. It started in 2011 when I sold my last business, the last business that I've sold. And I thought, man, I'm going to go out. At that time, I was 60, right? 50. Anyway, I'm 71 now, whatever. Yeah. And I thought, do I want to go do that again, start a business, raise capital and put the whole thing together and get the marketing and then find out if the market wants what you're selling. I mean, always novel products. And I thought, I really don't want to do that again. And so I somewhat arrogantly thought maybe I have something to teach that I could share what I know. And I would enjoy that. And I do enjoy that. I wasn't wrong about that. But it took a couple of years to figure out, you may know a lot of stuff, and I've done a lot of stuff right and a lot of stuff wrong. And I thought, man, I could help people avoid the wrong and double down on the good. But it took a while to figure out how to do it. And so there were a couple of rough years where I really wasn't making a good living. And then I kind of hit my stride and had a blast. My wife is a speech pathologist. And about the same time, she used to teach at a university, teach speech pathology at a university, and ran a clinic for a practicum. But she got tired of academia and came home and started working as a speech path. And so I was talking to her and I said, well, hey, and I really don't want this to be misinterpreted. I do not take credit for what she's done. But I did say, hey, I'm a business coach. If you ever think you maybe wanted to start your own. And at first she said, no, I do not. I've seen what you go through. I don't want to do it. About a year later, she said, how would that work? So she got introduced to a 5-year Excel spreadsheet. Anyway, I won't go through the details, but it literally was there's a box in the upper left-hand corner, like number of clients. What got to put a number in there? Well, I don't know. Neither do I, but you got to put a number in there. Revenue per client? Well, I don't know. What insurance? Anyway, all that. But she did it, intending to grow to the size of 6. And we are now at, I always have to count. I think we're at 27 clinicians now. We've got a 7-digit payroll, almost 8. And we're both sitting here with our eyes bugging out going, what the hell happened? But what's really fun is she's a really, really good business owner. And beyond the scope of maybe today to describe why, but there are lots and lots of things that are tells for a really good business owner. And she displays them and she does them. And I give her credit for it. And she likes it. And now I'm in business. She knows what I'm talking about. I know what she's talking about. And our conversations over the kitchen table in the morning are about business. And we both love it. And then eventually she said, you know what? I'm sick and tired of talking about it. I ain't talking about it anymore today. And I go, okay. But anyway, sorry, that may be too much. But so I wound up with 2 functioning businesses after I quit being in business. But
yeah, isn't that funny how it works out?
Surf the wave till it hits the beach,
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you have a lot of titles, or some folks say that you are a specialist in certain areas. I love that you target construction companies or working with contractors. And gosh, you've got so many great stories that I want to get to. Obviously finance and understanding accounting is what I view as one of your biggest strengths, but we've talked to a lot of folks, even recently, just about EOS, traction, things like that. But you have a very simplified way of looking at business in the 4 areas. And when I heard this the first time, I was like, we are overcomplicating it. We just need to focus on what Martin said. We're to the 4 areas. So would you mind going over those 4 areas of business that's the only place it matters?
This is the place where I had to build a construct for me when I meet a new client. They walk in and they've got this issue, that issue. a lot of times the same issue described differently, some way to say, okay, where are we? What's the most important thing and what do we do? And I am well aware of traction. I think it's great. It's a method, and you need a method and a plan and steps and big picture and little picture. You need all those things. But this was mine, and this is where the 2 years came in. And I consider there to be 4 fundamentals of every business. I don't care what business you're in. There are 4 fundamentals. And the first is guiding the business. That's leadership. That's having a vision. It's having culture. It's having a plan. It's having goals. It's incentivizing people. It's holding people accountable. It's leadership. I'll just leave it at that. So there's guiding the business, which is leadership. There's getting the business, which is marketing and sales. Marketing, of course, is attracting the leads. Sales is closing the deal. Then there's production. So guiding the business, getting the business, doing the business is delivering whatever it was you sold on time, on budget, at a profit with a raving fan client, right? So those are 3. The 4th one is what I call administering the business. And I call it that because that's what it is. And that one is the one where everybody's heard of leadership, probably not done anything really to enhance their skills or learn more about it, but just a gate cut company coming in off the street with a harried owner. They know about it, but they haven't done anything. Everybody knows about marketing and sales, whether they've done anything or done it well or not. Everybody knows about production. That's why they got in the business, to do whatever they're good at. When you get to administration, I describe that to people who started their businesses as everything you had never even heard of when you started business, okay? It's bookkeeping, finance, cash management, HR, IT, regulatory compliance, corporate governance issues, insurance, if I didn't already say that, legal issues, the posters that you have to have up over your water fountain. It's just this immense, crushing mass of stuff you never heard of. And mostly it has major consequences if you fail to comply. So when I meet somebody, I'm sounding, Mark Twain sounding, throwing out the Bob, see how deep, in those areas, where's the weakness? Where's the weakness? And by that, what I mean is, where will we have the greatest impact? Maybe people can sell the hell out of stuff, but they can't ever deliver on time, right? Maybe people can sell and deliver, but they run out of cash because they don't understand cash flow. Maybe people can sell and deliver, and if they can do 3 things, they probably got the 4th one right. But maybe they can sell and deliver, and they got money, and things are kind of going along, but they have no vision. They bring people into their company who aren't appropriate to their culture. It blows up. Anyway, so we got to look and see what's the most pressing thing. And we find that thing, and we begin to work on it until it is no longer the short stave in the barrel. It's at that point that you move on to the next thing. And so, I don't know, and overall of it, by the way, is the 5th thing. That's not really one of the 4, but it's the mindset of the owner. We constantly work on that, constantly. And I have to tell you this, in a month, I will have been in business for 50 years, which scares the hell out of me. But anyway, there you go. And up until about 10 years ago, I wouldn't have given me a nickel for touchy-feely crap. Matter of fact, you come in and talk about that to me, and I'd spit on the ground and say, I like people like me, just freaking do it, Well, now I've come to learn that is where the action is. And I can't tell you how many times I've had successful business people who are above the mean walk in, sit down, and it will come out, well, I never had no college education. And I go, what'd you bring that up for? Well, people like me, people like you never had college education. I said, I'll take you over here and show you 25,000 people with a basket weaving degree that's not worth anything. And you want to swap with them? Anyway, so mindset overarching everything. What are they thinking? What are their thoughts, their self-respect, their self-perception? and fighting those barriers. So anyway, that was kind of a lengthy.
No, it's incredibly simplified because there's tons of books out there. The Pinnacle Process, Fix This First by Mike Michalowicz, EOS Traction, and Martin, credit where credit's due. It's insanely simple and very easy to understand. And I know I'm glad you brought that up, that it was meant to be for you to be able to find where do we work on, because we get this too, where contractors come in and they're like, I got these problems, and they go on, they list 20 different things.
Gary Keller's book, Your One Thing or The One Thing, I don't remember. It's easy to read, it's fun to read, and you need to read it because there is no such thing. I mean, MIT, Harvard, which I hate to cite them as these days, but studies, there is no such thing as multitasking. You cannot, as a human being, do that. You can switch fast, but there's no multitasking. So if you're working on 5 things, you're working on nothing, generally. Sorry.
Martin, I'm curious, the breakdown that it's a simple kind of, those are the 4 components. When you enter as a coach into a business, do you think typically the owners or the operators of that business have any self-awareness that it's like, hey, this is the 1 or 2 that I need to focus on? Or generally speaking, do they need the outside voice to kind of make them more aware?
I would say, 1, if they're talking to me, every now and then I get somebody who just wants to get better, but they're in pain, or why did they call, right? And so they know in general something's up. They don't know what. If that answers your question. And so I mean, they'll have ideas. Oh, Johnny's a cheat, or people, so-and-so's it's a competition. It's the whatever self-limits they put on there. And they'll lay all that stuff out, and then you have to begin to look at it, analyze it, dismantle it if it needs to be dismantled, reinforce it if it needs to be reinforced. But generally, they just know something is unsatisfactory.
Yeah. Well, in regards to this, Dillon, I got to tell you a funny story. So even though this concept that Martin's talking about, the 4 simple areas that you need to focus on, there was this time where he was in the neighborhood. He came by our office, and he was just going to come by and say, hey. And he goes, hey, I'm just in the neighborhood. How you doing? And I'm like, I'll tell you how I'm doing. Come in here. And I pulled him in. I showed him a profit and loss statement for a month that we tanked. We were awful. It was like, I don't know, negative 14%. It was bad. And I was just pacing, and I probably, look like Jim Carrey in that movie Liar, Liar, where he spikes his hair up. And Martin looks at it for literally, 12 seconds. And he goes, well, I mean, you grew X amount, and all that money came out of your gross profit margin. So what did you expect would happen? And I'm like, I mean, it was literally, it took, Martin, 15, 20 seconds. I was so excited that she came by to help me in my state of depression. But this is what you do. That's why we get along so well. But this also, I think, led you to starting to publish your book, which I know started with a series of really blog or short essays, and then it developed into a full-fledged book. I love, by the way, to our 3 listeners, there's a great blog Martin puts out. One of my favorite one is called The Tyranny of the Urgent. Great blog. You need to read it. But take us through the journey of why you wrote the book, what it's about. I've read it 3-4 times. I was kind enough, Martin, thank you, to be able to read the manuscript, the first 3 chapters, before you pushed it to the publishers, so thank you. But yeah, tell us about The Profit Problem, because it is in my top 5. It is an amazing book.
Well, thank you for that. I want to jump to the title real quickly. The title was to be, as you said, they say I make money, so why don't I have any? And my publisher said, that can't be a title. That's too many words. We can't do that. And so she came up with The Profit Problem, which is a great title. And then she said, well, take that off. And I said, you put that right back on there and don't ever bring it up again. And I tell that, I have never shown it to a business owner, ever, that didn't just start laughing and go, that's me, right? And I'll really go back to the origin. My dad, my father, was an inventor, had about 21 patents, created a couple of companies that around patented products, that one of them became, it's an asphalt paving machine, and it became, by a Harvard Business Review, the most efficient manufacturer in the United States in probably 1969. That, like when I was a senior in high school. And he had a consultant, a guy from Chicago named Helmut Gorling, a German guy. And they came down and they figured out how to do this damn stuff, right? And he gave me a book, which I'm not going to bore you, but it's arm's reach behind me, called The Break-Even System by Spencer Tucker in 1963, who described what break-even was. It's typed, the charts in there are graphs that are drawn. It's you got to want to know what he's talking about. He's an engineer. But if you do, it's just fascinating. Well, my dad gave that to me when it's 1969. And I read it then, and I knew it then. And I sat with those two guys while I was still in high school, while they figured out, using marginal analysis, how to become the most efficient manufacturer in the United States. I sat with them. So I knew about break-even, and then I went on to do my own businesses. It was integral to everything. You have to know your margins, have to know your break-even, you have to know how to use break-even to make decisions. And that's just stuff you can do with a P&L, right? Which is one of three financial statements, the other being balance sheet and the statement of cash flows. But for operating purposes, you use a P&L, understand margin, understand how to use it to make decisions. And it is just like a high beam mag light, right? It just shows you right what you need to do. And then you go do it. And it's kind of like, oh, that's what I have to do. That is one of the defining tells of a good business owner that I talked about earlier. We find something like that. You're doing it. I'll use you as the vending machines in the shop to get the guys out the door on time every day, right? One more job per truck per month. How much did that add to the bottom line? And I don't know if those numbers are straight up, but that kind of thing. Well, the successful business owner will get up off of his or her ass and go do it. Instead of going, well, and anyway, sorry, get a little strident. I get strident about this stuff. I love it.
Honestly, Martin, I've understood a lot about accounting principles. You've enhanced it since we met many, many years ago. But I was never excited about it until I met you and read your book. Because then accounting is back to that, almost like the administrating of the business. It's all typically the shit the business owner or the entrepreneur doesn't want to do. But you do a really good job in the book, and I'm sure you probably heard this from folks. By the way, I would tell anybody listening to this, go to Amazon right now. You got to get this book, because you take a lot of the accounting principles, but you use examples from history to explain why it's done this way, which I love. I know you're a weird history buff. You keep like History Channel on repeat at the house, Dillon. So you would, Dillon is one of those weirdos that will read everything, never listen to anything audio. But so I got a question for you, Martin. Oh, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Well, one of the main principles, I lay this out for people, and I have never seen or stumbled across or worked with a successful business that did not have good books. Okay, now define successful, because there are people who are in business and make money, right? But sustained growth, sustained profitability, and the ability for the owner to delegate responsibility and step out of the business. Until that happens, what it is a job. And according to the particular talents of an individual owner, they could make billions, I don't know. But since the owner's gone, they're dead. But by those three criteria, I've never seen it. So if you are driving around and maybe you're doing $1 million, or maybe you're up there doing 3, 4, 5 million, starting to think of yourself like, okay, man, I'm doing it. Well, you are doing it. I'll give you credit for that. But you're not there if you don't have books. You are not there. And then you want to know what really flips me is because people go, well, what do I need books for? And that's kind of like me with gravity. I'm so used to gravity. Somebody said, what do we need gravity for? I go, I don't want to float off into space. Well, I mean, to look for why you need books, what they tell you and how they inform you, it's not to pay taxes. Yeah, you can pay taxes. Yeah, your banker asked for them. But you need to know. I had a guy on our podcast last week, and very successful. He's acquired 3 companies and put him with his and 4th. He's doing great. And anyway, a couple of his main precepts is every job that finishes, my people have to send me a job costing analysis immediately upon invoicing or as soon thereafter. Sometimes the bill's got to roll in. He said the subject line of the email must be the margin. And that subject line determines whether or not I open the email.
Yeah.
If they're doing great, no problem. But he looks immediately, need real-time information. We bid it at a 50% margin. I hear that kind of stuff. I bid it 70% margin. Well, usually it's a markup, not a margin. But anyway, but then we go look at their books and what came through, 15%. Well, what the hell happened? That's how you manage a business. That's true of all businesses, but it's really fun. Probably half my business is manufacturing, contracting, home builders, because I love it. I did it, with my dad. But the same stuff applies. I've had doctors. I've got a publisher now, medical practices. I mean, just every kind of business, retail. And it's the same. It's the same, but it's a little more fun in contracting because you can do things like buy vending machines so that you don't lose 9 trucks, 4 guys at the convenience store every morning, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's fun because you typically see immediate responses because you start and end the day winning or losing in construction, and you can course correct pretty quickly in one day. You can also lose in one day too, and sometimes it's just weather. But it's funny you talk about like retail businesses, doctors' offices. That stuff seems so outer space to me, Martin, and it's just because I grew up in this world. This is what I do. So I do have this conversation often with folks. I am a big believer, this in accrual accounting practices. And when I talk about accrual accounting, it's funny. Some people, they look at me like I got 3 heads. And I don't know, Dillon, have you ever seen, there's some stuff on the internet where Sean, what was his name? Who is the quarterback for the Broncos? Peyton Manning. Have you ever heard him do like a call in a huddle for a play? Have you heard those? It's insanely complicated. And it's like, whoa, yeah, that is like super high performing level. And then people, when I talk about accrual accounting, they look at me like that. And I'm like, no, it's not that complicated. So I talk to a lot of businesses, Martin, about, listen, you need to really focus on getting correct chart of accounts, understanding what is direct expenses, what is indirect expenses. So then you can slowly start working out of the windshield rather than the rearview mirror. So what advice would you give to, say, a contractor cresting $1 million, looking to grow this year? Hopefully they're not going to try to triple in 1 year. We'll get to that later. But what advice do you have for somebody that really needs to up their game on that? Obviously, read your book is a great focus, but how do you do that?
I really am enthralled with this stuff. There's nothing I like more than finding some subtle, non-obvious way to use books to make money. But really, I'm not that smart. There are not that many of them. They've been out there a long time. I did not discover them, but I'm a proponent. But most people aren't. They're not interested. And so when I talk about this stuff, as I will be doing in your offices in a week, but as I talk about this stuff, what I spend my time doing is showing them how books can help them make a lot of money. For example, I'll just throw out 2, right? Mm-hmm. One is if you can improve your gross profit margin by 1%, meaning like from 40% to 41%, not, but 1%. Your net profit, the net profit of the average company in the United States will go up 15%. Mm-hmm. People go, what?
Huge.
I go, can you improve your gross profit margin 1%? Well, once I know what it is, I guess maybe.
Yeah, where do I start?
I got an idea for you. How about you raise your freaking prices today on your cell phone 1%? And actually that will do more because that's not a marginal increase. That's straight. Anyway, so little simple things like that.
I picture you get an answer like, what's a margin?
Oh, I do. And I'm not making, and I tell people, I go, why would you know any of this stuff? Why would you? Well, don't feel bad about it. And if you don't like it, that's fine. Don't like it. But that's why I tell people how important it is, because You don't need to know how to do books. I mean, I want to know because I want to know what the heck I do. You don't need to, but you need somebody who does. And I'm going to give you an example here in just a second. And I have a place in my book where I tell them, this is what you're looking for. Because there are a lot of people that will do your books. A lot of CPAs whom I love who will do your books don't have any interest whatsoever until February. And then they get your books right. And then they file an extension. And then they adjust them. And next September, you find out if you made money last month. Well, in the meantime, you've gone broke and you're in prison, right? Debtor's prison. So what difference does it make? Accrual accounting, we will define that because you talk cash basis accounting records transactions when they're settled. When you pay somebody or when somebody pays you. So if you sold a $100,000 HVAC system to some guy in his $1 billion house and he hadn't paid you yet, it's not reflected on your books. Accrual base, it is. You invoice that guy, it shows up in your books. It doesn't show up as money, but it shows up as a sale. Same thing on the other side. If you buy something on your credit card or on accounts payable with your supplier and you don't pay them, it's not on your books. So you don't know. You didn't know you sold that unless you remember. You didn't know you bought that unless you remember. And then here come the bills and you're trying to match them up. So here's the importance of it. And this happened, well, he's been a client 2 months. Great guy in Louisville, Kentucky. Calls me up. He is an artist with furniture and cabinets. I haven't said his name, so he's growing like a weed. He's brand new, but he did about $1.5 million, right? Last year. So I said, well, send me your financials. He goes, I got financials. I'll send them to you. Sends them over. And I look at his sales were like 1.4 and he made $500,000. Okay. I said, that's pretty good. That's 30%, 33%. And he goes, you think that's pretty good? I go, yeah, most places make 7. But I got to tell you, I'm suspicious, right? And so we start poking around a little bit. And by the second week, I discover he's doing a $230,000 job, which he just finished yesterday. He had not done a nickel's worth of work on December 31st, so it's all this year. But he invoiced the guy for 50% down. And that showed up in income last year. So 150, and actually it was more than that. So, but let's say 200 of that 495 was bogus. I mean, it's not bogus. But I hope people understand if you invoice for something that you haven't done, it's inflating your sales. If you invoice and you get paid, you don't have to know the word, but it's a liability. That's not your money. It doesn't go in your sales. It goes in a different account that says, hey, owe this to Billy Bob, because that's not mine, right? And I see that all the time. As a matter of fact, there are these softwares that I won't throw out the names, mainly because I can't remember the name of this one. I have another client in Norfolk or Richmond, Virginia. Same thing, we're talking about can he hire? And I go, yeah, you got all these receivables. You got $150,000 worth of receivables here. We collect those and you got your down payment on your project manager. Let's go. And he goes, well, I got to do them first.
Oh, no.
So I said, well, how did that happen? The software, and there's no option to change this, his software had him write a proposal, and then the customer accepts it. Upon accepting it, the software creates an invoice and posts it to QuickBooks. And I'm going, there's a software designer who came from the trades with zero understanding. And so, point of that is, books are immensely useful if they're right. And most of the time when I see them, they are not. And most of the time, it is not the business owner who should correct them. That's not the best use of your time. You can spend a couple of years trying to figure it out. There's learning books, but there's also learning like QuickBooks. I understand books very, very, very well. I'm not sure how to do everything I know how to do in QuickBooks because it's click, click, what happened, right? So anyway, did that answer the question?
Yes, it did. But it is interesting how many CRMs, customer resource managers, are trying to behave like ERPs, which ERPs are very driven towards the financial side. And you're right, They're typically, well, heck, I'm a good example. Software company birthed out of a need that I had in my business, and that's where a lot of these come from. And all of a sudden you realize, actually, that's not how that's supposed to work in the financial world. But you had a good idea, but that's not how it really works.
I have a client we termed out. I mean, it was all good, right? Terrible books. Not even going to say what part of the United States they're in. Terrible books. I'm on them like a duck on a June bug. You got to get your books. We don't know if we're making money. We don't know your per unit costs. We don't know your per unit costs. We don't know if we're getting any better. Yeah. Well, they just didn't believe me. But got to writing his own ERP, right? Complete process management. And he's got a guy who's a programmer writing the bookkeeping software. Okay. Now they do this in Europe, but what do you suppose the first line on the first report is? Profit. You're not going to guess, right? Then you figure out you can get, well, what's the same? You can do everything upside down. Actually, in Europe, they do. But it's incredibly difficult for anybody, bankers, CPA. They can figure it out. But what do we all say? What's the bottom line, right? Hey, just tell me the bottom line. Well, we made 100. Well, that line happens to be the first one. Well, that's what I'm most interested in. I go, it's not what I'm most interested in. I'm most interested in your margins and your overhead and what's your break even. And I got to go and unravel this whole thing. And we've never balanced those books. And I just said, look, until you hire a professional accountant who's engaged and get these things right, we don't have any more to talk about because they don't know. They do not know if they made money. And we're doing it like most of our listeners might be, looking at your bank app, right? Seeing what bank's in there. You're looking at your accounts receivables, and then you're remembering the payable, or you can look online a lot for a supply house. So you're kind of doing the math, but you got timing issues there, right? Because maybe your bank's got an extra 100 in it because the payroll hadn't come out yet, right? So you got to look at them at the same time, and just don't stinking do that, And that's where we get into the history.
Well, now I'm intrigued because I think you covered this in the book, Martin, and sorry if I forgot it, about how they do accounting in Europe. Because honestly, that's typically what most business owners want. How much money did I make? Put it at the top, right? Yeah.
No, don't read me wrong. European, and I did a comparison of 3 large companies for a large company on the behest of one of them. They're very good financials. They're just they just upside down from the way we do it. And if you've been looking at financials for a long time here, you're going, wait a minute. Does that add into that number? So they do it. They have excellent accountants in huge companies, but it's just backwards to what we do. And that's complication I don't need.
Well, we made a joke before about our 3 listeners, but we do have folks from all over the United States, especially in Ohio, the Carolinas, Florida, and they're in these growth spurt. These companies are. And, I think it's really important, Martin, for you to go through real quick, because I'm sure by the way, it's like a muscle. The financial statements are like a muscle. You just got to keep working them out. Hell, I've been at it 19 years and I'm still getting better at it. I think you'd be proud of me, Martin. We finally this year we now calculate depreciation monthly. So that way we can, it's taken us so long.
Now I do have to tell you, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I do have to tell you, I am very much in favor of that because you have a better picture going along. But of all the expenses to calculate monthly, that's the one I least care about because it's a non-cash expense. But people get their workers' comp bill in January and they're going to save 10%. They pay $130,000, right? And they book it in January. And I don't want a business owner to think he or she's got to go in there and divide that by 12 and remember to book it every month. But you're not getting an accurate picture. You're going to say to your banker, well, that shows a $100,000 loss, but that's because, explain. Oh, the banker says, but then has to remember to explain it to the president or the loan committee chairman. So just doing it right is, and I never expect that the owner is going to be the one to do it right.
Yeah. Well, they may be a little favorable. Like, man, what can I manipulate in here to make me feel better about all the hard work I just did so I can go afford that $110,000 truck?
That's another, there's a chapter in there about that.
I remember that. It's a great chapter. What's it titled? Isn't it like how I built 3 houses for free or something?
Oh, well, no, that's a subtopic, how to build houses for free. Yeah. I mean, just showing different ways. Had a builder, and we made a 3% improvement in the gross profit margin over a year, and it produced the same amount of money, net profit, to the company as it would have taken to build 29 houses. That is a big outfit. Okay? So which would you rather, and I don't know, was it 29? Anyways, a whole bunch of houses. What would you rather do? Get your margins 3% better or build those houses? Which, if it had happened recently, you'd still have, right? So, hey, you did ask a question, and I didn't answer it. I think it's important. You said growth, right? How do you use books to talk about growth? And you said, I hope they didn't double this year, try to triple this year. I think people understand this, but bookkeeping, that if you're going to grow, you're going to need capital. You need all the things Gino Wickham talking about, too. You need people and processes. But you need money. And I have a client who's just rocking and rolling.
I thought that was going to go the other direction.
No. This guy, I'm so proud of him. I mean, I could spit. I just love him. He does it. It's working. The payoff's there and all this. Well, he called me about 6 months ago, and his average job's probably about 27. They're in the millions of sales, but $27,000, $28,000 are his average job. He got a chance to do a $1 million project. And I said, okay, tell me about it. Well, it's commercial, general contractor, not commercial, but anyway, it involved a general contractor, not dealing with a home builder or a person, like general contractors aren't people. Some of them are. No. And so I said, well, these are the terms, it's 30 days and, all the bills we get in 30 days, pay on the following 20th. So I said, well, let's just look at that. What's your capacity? And we know his capacity to do in units because that's one of the things we track. And so we were tracking his units and we said, well, you realize this project will suck up 100% of your capacity for 7 weeks. Well, no, 2 months and 3 weeks. So what's that? 11 weeks. Huh, really? He said, so what's going to happen to your whole Rolodex of clients and customers you've been serving all these years? You're going to tell them I can't do it, right? And then they're going to pay you in 30 days, right? Well, what happens is you invoice in 30 days, they pay you 20 days later, right? Well, you missed that cutoff. And now it's 60 plus 20, right? And you're paying the payroll, you're paying the materials, and yeah, you've got some support from your suppliers not paying at all. But I said, if you take that job, I guarantee you are dead. Dead. And he didn't do it. He actually talked to the guy and said, I'd love to do some of them. Took a little piece, manageable piece that fits right in his process flow. But you have to know, you get this from your balance sheet. It's called working capital. And basically, simple thing to think about is your accounts receivable and your inventory. And I'll say minus your accounts payable, but I like just look at your accounts receivable and your inventory as a percentage of sales. So like your monthly sales are 100,000 and you got 90,000 of, well, let's take annual sales. Annual sales are 10 million and you've got $500,000 worth of receivables. 50% of your sales are going to receivables. So if you double your sales from 10 million to 20 million, you got to have 5 million more cash put up against to float your receivables. And those guys don't pay at the end. They hold back 10%. And they hold that back for about 15 years, right? You have to get it out of the estate of their grandchildren. Sorry, we got general contractors listening, probably not going to like that. But wow, there's a whole bunch of stuff.
Martin, I think you bring up a really great point, because in the midst of, so when you think about accounting, and this is personal and business, when you have control over what's going on, it gives you freedom, right? And so what you just described is like, yeah, you had control over, what we needed to look at and how this $1 million contract was going to affect your business. And because of that, you made an informed decision that, no, we shouldn't take this on, otherwise it's going to sink the ship, right? And so can you just speak a little bit more to that? What control does in terms of freedom, and how command of your books is going to give you more decision-making power?
Yeah, before you answer that, Martin, sorry, I had to go plug my computer in. I don't think people realize you just saved that company by talking them out of that monster project. And, I've done it myself. Oh, man, it's the biggest project we've ever done. It's going to be great. We see all the optimism in it. So I don't think you get enough credit, because that company could be an evergreen 100-year-old company, and they're never going to remember the nice little guy, Martin Holland, that actually saved them.
I really am loath to take credit, and I'm going to tell you why. Business owners, I have so much respect. I can't describe how much I'm getting old, but I've cried when I've seen my business owners be brave, right? And they get no stinking credit. Oh, I went to the Nebraska football game 2 years ago, something like that. It was in Nebraska. It was a retro game. And I stayed in Airbnb with my brother-in-law and his wife from Florida. She works for a construction company. He's really kind of a bigwig architect, but he works for another company. So we're at breakfast, and my sister-in-law goes, "Man, must be nice. You and Diane both own your own businesses. You can take off like for 6 months if you want to." And Diane and I looked at each other. We had both been on our computers that morning, which is not necessarily a virtue, but no clue what goes on. And business owners, and I still don't take credit. Thank you for saying I saved that company. But, he made the decision. He sought the advice. He saw the logic. He decided not to do it. He's the one in the game. He's the man in the arena, right? And I can't tell you. I got a little chapter on that. The very last chapter of my book is about that. And it is the highest, everything. I'm getting a little philosophical here, hand striding. Everything that we see around us, sub-tens from business. Business is where transactions happen. Transactions create profit, which is excess value. And it is from a share of that profit that governments run, that universities pay their people, that pave our streets, that pay for law enforcement, all from a share of the profits that was realized because somebody took a risk. And Will, I know you're risky. Got on a plane, flew to Edmond, Oklahoma, and said, stake my flag here. Let's see what happens, right? That's why I like doing what I'm doing. That's why I like to get on the podcast like this. Because, you can tell I'm getting excited because I'm excited by it. And I'm just going, yeah. And then people do stupid stuff and it blows up. They're going. And so back to your question, Dillon, I guess.
Sorry, Dillon. I
No, you're
totally
good. Yeah,
hijacked.
I love that. Yeah, that was great.
It's great.
Well, the thing, back to your question about, books, Mike McAllowitz, we had him on our podcast, and I go, "Hey, buddy," and I like him. Profit First is great. But I said, "You said the books are voodoo." And he goes, No. I go, "Good. Back off that." Books follow rules, and they can, manipulated sounds foul. They can be kept in different ways and show different results. Okay. So people are, skeptical sometimes, but they are as close to fact as you will get in business, right? If somebody breaks his leg and you can see it, that's a fact. And the operations of a business and where are we going and what are we planning for? Books are as close to fact as we have. And as Will said, as you keep them more and more over time, they get closer and closer and closer and closer to fact. And what I tell people, and we'll be talking about next Friday, Will, is books exist to answer 5 questions. Am I making money? What do I own? What do I owe? What's left over for me? The difference between what I own and what I owe. And where did my cash go? That's why they were created in the year 1200 and have been in universal use since that time. But there is a 6th question, and that's what my book is about. What should I do? Right? I love that it answers those arrear questions. Am I making money? What do I owe? What do I own? Where did my cash go? Those are all very important because they will educate our future. But the one I really want to know is what should I do? Because all that other stuff has happened already. And you might look back and go, well, what I know I want to do is not that, because that didn't work out. So what do I do? And that's the 6th question. And I think I answered the question. I'm getting so strident, I'm winding up off topic.
No, that's all right. Listen, I know you got a coaching call coming up here in a little bit, so you're going to come in there all fired up after this podcast and be like, why are you...
He sent me, matter of fact, he texted me about 15 minutes ago, hurt his back, and can we do it Monday? So I'm not. But you have a time value too. But I sent him, from our coaching sessions, I send the things to do. He fired back 5 things he had done. I can't read them to you, but he said at the end, how about that? And I go, how about that? Because he rocked it. He rocked it. So it's so fun when you get people who want to do it, then you see the results.
Well, when they can start to see that win, and then they get into informed optimism. Isn't that what it's called, Dillon? So, Martin, I love this because another thing that I love about books is you get to turn around and I don't care even if it's got a great number at the bottom. There's something that we did wrong in there. We got to learn from our mistakes. And it's like, well, we got to correct that. And it's like, well, we made 12%. And it's like, well, we didn't make 18.
And that's such a great one. It was 18. Is 25% reasonable in a market that other people do? And they say, how you answer that is 100% goes back to that mindset deal. I can't do that. My competition will eat me up,
Well, I know you have to deal with that with like the first thing is trying to convince or get over the mindset issues of raise your prices, right? And it solves so many problems and symptoms and causes of issues in a company. But speaking of looking back into the books, the great segue is we always ask our guests, Martin, is what is one of the biggest screw-ups you ever made in business that you can hopefully, like a Texan, brag? What's the saying, Dillon? Lose so bad, you lose like a Texan. You can brag about it. That's what it is. From, Robert Kiyosaki said that. So what could you share, Martin, that would help one of our listeners?
Well, this may not be what you're looking for. You did tell me right before we went on that you were going to ask that. And I thought back, I got a lot of, I wish I hadn't driven into that mud hole kind of deal.
Actually, we'll create a whole other episode. You've been in business 50 years, Martin. We'll just call this the Martin Screw-Up episode. No, I wouldn't do that to you.
Each episode is a different decade.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, I really thought, I've reflected over 50 years, right? Like what this and that, and not just for myself, for my clients, but also for myself. And here's one that may or may not strike, but is keenly important. I got into bed with people who did not share my values. Okay? Now, I'm not calling them crooks because they weren't crooks. They wanted different things. They went about things differently. And I was very unhappy. They were unhappy, and the businesses came apart. One of them is one of them that failed. The other one, we sold it. But my real gut buster, exceedingly unhappy, really tortured, I got to get the hell out of this, was because I didn't pay attention to matching values, right? And again, I want to say I'm not calling them crooks, but they didn't have my values and I didn't have theirs. And they didn't like me either. It wasn't a one-way street. So there's an urgency, an urge maybe when a company's trying to grow and maybe they realize I need help. And so some guy goes, I'll help you. Give me 10% of the company or whatever it is. I'll help you and we'll go. And they're not, I'm going to do Shakespeare. He says, those friends thou hast and their adoption tried, grapple them to thy soul with hoops of steel, but do not dull thy palm with entertainment of every new hatched, unfledged comrade. And that's what I did, right? New hatched, exciting, cool. Let's do this. Sign some papers. And all of a sudden it's like, oh crap. So that's my big failing. The other stuff is bumps in the roads,
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, because I have had similar situations in the past. You and I both know successful people that have had similar situations. I think, Michael Morrison, who's somebody you've mentored for a long time, it's a very similar situation. Now he shares that with his businesses.
He's my example for that, and I share it with not mine, but his example, and I share it with his permission.
Yeah. Well, but Martin, I can't tell you how excited that you came on today to talk to us. There's just so much knowledge, so much benefit that people see that they don't realize that you're kind of the man behind the curtain in a little bit. I know you give a lot of credit to your owners. Thank goodness for your modesty. But you're a great guiding light to business owners out there. So your book, obviously, we just spoke about this the other week because we have a group of contractors you're going to be meeting with, and I'm going to get a few books off of Amazon. But how do people reach you in Anneal Business Coaching? I know that we're active on LinkedIn, but what's the best way for someone to reach out to you for questions?
Actually, call me, and I don't mind putting my phone number up. It's 405-641-1928. And actually probably text first because I'm on my phone a lot. And I'll get back. I love to talk to people. I'll send you an email, and I've got a calendar, and you can book a time, and got a website. You can go read some stuff, things like that.
Yeah. Oh, and on the website, I do want to know the web address. You can also link up to subscribe to Martin's blog, which is what I mentioned before about one of my favorite blogs is The Tyranny of the Urgent, which is a great just story. But what is the website, Martin?
It's www.annealbc.com, and that's ANNEALBC.com.
Yeah. And by the way, you have a unique story behind Anneal. I would love to hear that because I didn't retain it.
Well, I hold it up as a great example of bad marketing, right? The name of my business should be Business Coaching, or if I wanted to segment, Business Coaching for Contractors, right? But when I was doing everything, when I say everything, guys, I've had 39 farms, psychiatry, everything. But my real passion is, I call it industrial. So I said, okay, I want to do something industrial. Well, one of my taglines is less stress, more free time, more money, right? Well, annealing, I don't want to insult anybody who knows, but a lot of people don't. Annealing is a heat treating process that's used on steel or metals, but steel and glass that reduces stress and increases strength. So me targeting an industrial audience, I thought they'll all know what annealing is. And so my coaching business is to reduce stress and increase your performance. And of course, nobody knows what the hell it means. So Anneal BC, Anneal Business Coaching.
It's brilliant. I love it because it's one of our core values in one of our companies is intention. And if you're going to do, our definition of that is that if you're going to do something, make it matter. And like a name like that, there's a story behind it. There's intentionality. So that's why I love it. So.
Well, the wise guys call me anal. Oh, what's that, anal? I've got buddies, and I go, that works for me. Yeah, anal business coaching.
Yeah. Hey, Dillon, set a reminder to go to GoDaddy and purchase anal business coaching so then we can capture lead flow and then sell them to Martin.
Yeah, and you can show me the ROI. I'll buy them.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. Well, Martin, listen, the world is a better place because of you, and just you are a friend of mine. I'm super excited that you could be on our show with us. You're going to help a lot more people, and I know you well enough. You're not going to retire. You are. By the way, if you lean over, I love seeing your artwork in the back. You're still an active cyclist. You're still doing art. There's all sorts of stuff outside of just business. So I love catching up with you. But yeah, thank you for that. Please go out and get Martin's book. And to everybody that's out there listening, visit his website, subscribe to his blog. It's going to make your life so much better. So, but yeah, Dylan, another week down, buddy.
Woo.
All right.
I'm feeling better about the numbers already. So
Yeah. Number of beers.
I don't know if I actually feel better or if it just gave me like more concern. Like now I'm like, oh yeah, there are like 16 things that we should look at.
Yeah, we're training Dylan into some books, but that's okay. Well, thanks for listening to another episode, and we'll see you guys next week.
Take care, everybody. Cheers.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Beers with Contractors. We hope you enjoyed our chat as much as we did. Before we say our final goodbyes, a friendly reminder. Beers with Contractors encourages responsible drinking. If you choose to enjoy a beverage during our time together, please do so in moderation and only if you're of legal drinking age in your country or state. Furthermore, the advice and insights shared in this podcast are for informational purposes only. Always consult with professionals and experts in your field, and be sure to follow local laws and regulations regarding licensing and permits. We're here to help, entertain, and inspire, but your safety and compliance are important. So, as you head out into the world of construction and contracting, remember to build responsibly and make decisions that stand the test of time. Thanks for joining us today. We'll catch you on the next episode of Beers with Contractors. Until then, cheers to your success.